What do you do when the man you supported for 10 years throws divorce papers on the table? Smirking that you will beg on the streets without his spare change, cry beg. I did neither. I calmly signed my name, using his blind arrogance to build an empire. This is not the tale of a discarded wife struggling to survive. It is a ruthless hunt where my prey willingly surrendered his entire fortune without realizing it. Hello, wonderful listeners of Zoe Revenge Stories, and thank you so genuinely for being here with us today. Recently, YouTube disabled our monetization features, completely cutting off the budget we rely on to operate. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1. This small act helps us pay our dedicated staff so they can afford their living expenses and continue crafting these stories for you. And you can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on the screen or by clicking the link in the description or comments below. My name is Haley Garza, and I am 36 years old. The air inside our sprawling Denver, Colorado mansion always felt a little too thin, a little too cold. Despite the crackling fireplace and the warmth of the roasted duck I had spent 6 hours preparing, it was a Friday night, and I was navigating the marble floors of our dining room, balancing crystal wine glasses and silver platters for my husband, Julian Vance. Julian was a tech sales director who wore his flashy success like a tailored suit. He loved the appearance of wealth, the illusion of absolute control, and above all, he loved an audience. Tonight, that audience consisted of his closest colleagues and their equally polished spouses. I moved quietly behind the chairs, pouring a 95-point Cabernet, when Julian's booming laugh sliced through the soft jazz playing in the background. "Oh, Haley is wonderful, really," Julian said, his voice loud enough to command the entire table. He leaned back in his leather chair, swirling the red wine in his glass. "But let us be honest. She is my beautiful parasite. If I did not hand her my black card every month, she would not even know how to pay the electricity bill. She lives in a bubble that I finance." A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the dining room. A few guests chuckled awkwardly, casting nervous glances in my direction. My grip tightened on the neck of the wine bottle until my knuckles turned white. But I forced my facial muscles into a serene, practiced smile. I did not drop the bottle. I did not scream. I just kept pouring. I had learned long ago that reacting to his public cruelty only fed his ego. It took another 2 hours for the final guest to summon their ride and depart. The moment the heavy oak front door clicked shut, the performance ended. Julian did not offer a single word of thanks for the flawless evening. Instead, he walked straight into the kitchen, his polished dress shoes clicking sharply against the tile, and tossed a thick stack of legal documents onto the pristine marble island. "Sign them," he commanded, not even bothering to look me in the eye. He loosened his silk tie with a sigh of exaggerated exhaustion. "I am moving on. Haley, I need a wife with actual value, someone who aligns with my trajectory, not someone who just arranges flowers and cooks. You have 30 days to pack your things and get out of my house." He waited for the meltdown. He braced his shoulders, expecting the tears, the desperate begging, the shattering of the fragile woman he thought he had created over the years. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. The suffocating weight I had carried for so long suddenly lifted. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up the silver pen resting near the documents, and flipped straight to the final page. I kept my face entirely devoid of emotion, without a single word of protest. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. Julian blinked, his smug expression faltering for a fraction of a second. He looked at the signed paper, then back at me, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his features. But his arrogance quickly swallowed it. He snatched the papers off the counter, offered a mocking half-smile, and walked out the door, leaving to spend the night wherever his new life awaited. Alone in the echoing silence of the massive house, I did not cry. I had work to do. I began clearing the empty glasses from Julian's private study. As I wiped down his mahogany desk, the primary monitor of the smart home system flickered to life. Years ago, before Julian decided my only skill was being a decorative housewife. I had been the one to code and install the entire security and data network for this house. He had completely forgotten that detail. A red security alert blinked on the screen, indicating a massive, abnormal data flow routing to a hidden external server. My curiosity overpowered my physical exhaustion. I sat in his leather chair, bypassed his painfully simple passwords in less than 2 minutes, and dug directly into the encrypted logs. What I found in those hidden files ripped the facade of his flashy life to shreds. Julian was not the wealthy, successful titan he pretended to be. He was drowning. The sprawling house, the luxury cars, the designer suits. It was all a fragile house of cards built on staggering, unmanageable debt. But the absolute betrayal lay in a folder marked with the name of a high-risk startup, Axiom Stride Innovations. I opened the files and felt the blood drain from my face. Julian had taken out a massive, ruinous mortgage to fund this doomed venture, but he had not used his own assets. He had used the rustic wooden cabin left to me by my late grandfather. Staring back at me from the glowing screen were pages of loan agreements, all authorized by my forged signature. And he was not doing it alone. The corporate filings for Axiom Stride listed a co-founder, a 24-year-old woman whose intimate photos populated a hidden folder on the exact same drive, his mistress. Julian planned to finalize a rapid divorce, forcing the crushing debt of the fraudulently mortgaged cabin onto my shoulders, while he took the remaining startup capital and vanished into a new life with his young partner. He thought I was too stupid to notice. He thought I was too weak to fight back. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The morning sun felt excessively bright as it poured through the bay windows, casting long shadows across the empty kitchen. I sat at the marble island with a cold cup of coffee in my hand, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. It was time to play the exact part my husband expected. I composed a series of frantic, desperately needy text messages. Julian, please, we can talk about this. Send. I do not know what I did wrong, but I can fix it. Please come home. Send. I cannot survive without you. Send. My thumb hovered over the glass, ensuring the tone was perfectly pathetic. I knew his psychology flawlessly. My apparent devastation was the ultimate anesthetic for his paranoia. As long as he thought I was paralyzed by grief and begging for his return, he would drop his guard and never bother to cover his digital tracks. While he was undoubtedly reading those texts to his new partner, feeling like a god among men. I was walking into the sleek downtown office of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a legal shark, a ruthless attorney who specialized exclusively in dismantling high-net-worth financial frauds disguised as marital dissolution. I did not shed a single tear as I sat across from his heavy oak desk. Instead, I handed him a thick file folder and a secure flash drive containing every corrupted log, forged signature, and hidden bank transfer I had extracted from the home server. Marcus reviewed the documents in absolute silence for 20 minutes. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim, but his eyes were sharp with the thrill of the hunt. "This is a classic dump and run," Marcus explained, leaning back in his chair and tapping his pen against the desk. "He is pushing for a 30-day expedited divorce to cleanly sever your legal ties. The moment the final decree is signed, he plans to transfer the remaining liquid assets into the startup's offshore holding accounts. He is going to leave you drowning in the massive fraudulent mortgage attached to your family property. By the time the bank forecloses and you realize what happened, he will be untouchable." "Not if we lock the doors before he can run," I replied coldly. We spent the next 4 hours establishing an invisible, impenetrable legal firewall. Marcus immediately prepared ex parte motions under seal to freeze the transfer of any marital assets and initiated a quiet title action to aggressively contest the forged mortgage. But I explicitly instructed him not to file them yet. We were not going to show our hand. We were going to let the traitor walk blindly into a trap of his own making. Returning to the sprawling mansion, I bypassed the pristine living room and headed straight for the detached 3-car garage. It was a graveyard of dusty boxes and discarded exercise equipment. I spent the next 6 hours dragging the junk to the curb, sweeping the concrete floor, and setting up heavy wooden workbenches. Before I was reduced to a decorative accessory, I had been deeply passionate about environmental design and closed-loop ecosystems. I had given it up because it did not fit his corporate image. Now, it was going to be my weapon. I pulled out my old design schematics for Smart Terrarium's Intricate. Self-sustaining botanical microenvironments integrated seamlessly into upcycled furniture, monitored by microsensors that controlled humidity and light. For 3 consecutive nights, I barely slept. I lived on black coffee and the pure, unadulterated adrenaline of reclaiming my identity. I soldered circuit boards, wired spectrum lights, and carefully planted rare mosses into beautifully restored wood frames. I deliberately utilized the exact premium eco-materials he used to mock as the garbage of dreamers. Now, they were the foundation of my first 3 prototype tables, glowing with life in the dark garage. On the afternoon of the 4th day, I was on my knees on the concrete, my hands coated in damp potting soil. When a shadow fell across my workbench, I turned to see him standing in the driveway. He had come to collect his custom golf clubs. He looked down at me, taking in my dirty jeans, the scattered tools, and the soil under my fingernails. A cruel, condescending smirk spread across his face. He reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out his wallet, and tossed a crumpled $100 bill onto the ground beside my knee. "This arts and crafts game will not pay the rent," he sneered, picking up his leather golf bag. "Get ready to wait tables." I scraped together every last penny I had, completely emptying a forgotten emergency savings account of exactly $4,500. It was a terrifying gamble, but I used every single cent to secure a 10 by 10-foot exhibition space at the prestigious Denver Green Space Design Expo. It was the premier event for architectural elites, luxury interior decorators, and high-end developers. I registered my tiny booth under the brand I had dreamed up in the cold isolation of my garage Verda nest. My display was not loud or flashy. I did not have towering digital banners or promotional models handing out glossy brochures. I had only my 3 handcrafted, Smart Terrarium coffee tables. Their polished, reclaimed walnut frames gleamed quietly under the harsh convention center lights, hiding the complex circuitry pulsing within. It was mid-afternoon on the 2nd day of the expo when the crowd parted, and my past strutted right into my future. Julian strolled down the main aisle, wearing a bespoke navy suit, looking every bit the tech visionary he desperately wanted the world to believe he was. Clinging tightly to his arm was his 24-year-old co-founder, draped in ostentatious designer labels. They were supposedly there to network and find investors for their fraudulent startup, Axiom Stride. But the moment Julian's gaze locked onto me standing behind my small table, his professional networking demeanor vanished, replaced instantly by a predatory, mocking smirk. He steered his mistress directly toward my humble booth, intentionally drawing the eyes of nearby investors and wealthy attendees. He stopped right in front of my centerpiece table, his eyes sweeping over the intricate glass and vibrant moss with undisguised contempt. "Well, well," Julian announced, his voice carrying effortlessly over the ambient hum of the crowded exhibition hall. "I see the charity case found a little hobby. Is this what you are doing with the alimony you think you are going to get?" Haley selling mud and weeds to the highest bidder. The surrounding crowd fell entirely silent. People stopped walking. The tension in the air became razor-sharp as attendees turned to watch the drama unfold. Julian did not stop there. He reached out and aggressively flicked the corner of a delicate, hand-blown glass planter resting near the edge of the table. It tipped over and shattered sharply against the polished concrete floor, sending damp soil and rare ferns scattering across the toes of my shoes. "Oops," he sneered, feigning a terribly insincere apology. He turned away from me and addressed the audience that had gathered, pitching his voice even louder. "Look at this pathetic display. Everyone, this is what happens when a bored, useless housewife tries to play entrepreneur. She drains a man's hard-earned wealth to fund a ridiculous little craft project. Go home. Haley, you are embarrassing yourself in front of real professionals. I looked down at the shattered glass at my feet. I looked up at the smug satisfaction radiating from his pores. He was waiting for me to break, to cry, to flee the convention center in absolute shame, exactly as I would have done a month ago. Instead, I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my control tablet. I did not raise my voice. I did not even look angry. I looked directly into his eyes and smiled a cold, victorious smile. You always did lack the vision to see beneath the surface, Julian, I said calmly. With a single deliberate tap on the screen, I initiated the primary demonstration sequence. The 3 terrarium tables did not just sit there, they woke up. A synchronized, soft mechanical hum vibrated through the booth. Inside the sealed glass environments, an array of hidden, precision-engineered micro-drip emitters activated, creating a mesmerizing, ethereal mist that danced elegantly over the vegetation. Seamlessly integrated LED spectrum lights, buried within the reclaimed wood, shifted from a warm amber to a crisp daylight glow, perfectly mimicking the circadian rhythm of a natural forest. The digital displays, embedded flawlessly into the walnut frames, flared to life, streaming real-time biometric data about the plant health, soil acidity, and ambient humidity, all processed through the proprietary microcontrollers I had meticulously soldered by hand. The crowd literally gasped. This was not a craft project. This was cutting-edge biometric engineering married to high-end sustainable furniture. Julian stepped back, his smirk completely obliterated. He stared at the glowing, breathing ecosystems, completely unable to comprehend the sophisticated technology operating right in front of him. His mistress dropped his arm, looking incredibly foolish. This system utilizes autonomous climate regulation algorithms, I explained, projecting my voice clearly to the captivated audience. It requires zero maintenance for 6 months. It is not mud and weeds. It is the absolute future of interior architectural ecology. And unlike some tech startups built on stolen funds and empty promises, my technology actually works. A collective murmur of astonishment and deep approval rippled through the onlookers. But the true magic of that moment was not just the technology itself. Standing less than 10 feet away was the host of a massively popular architectural design vlog, currently broadcasting live to an audience of over 200,000 subscribers. His high-definition camera had been pointed directly at my booth the entire time. He had captured every single second of the exchange. He had recorded Julian's arrogant bullying, the destruction of my property, my icy composure, and the spectacular technological reveal. By the time the expo doors closed that evening, that unedited clip had been ripped from the live stream and shared across every major social media platform in the United States. The internet operates on outrage, and Julian had just served himself up on a silver platter. The sheer audacity of this arrogant man publicly humiliating his soon-to-be ex-wife, only to be effortlessly destroyed by her undeniable genius, became an instant cultural phenomenon. Within 24 hours, the video accumulated over 5 million views. By hour 48, it had crossed 12 million. The comment sections were a war zone of fury directed entirely at the terrible husband, tearing apart his cheap suit and his fragile ego, but far more importantly, that blazing inferno of public outrage funneled directly into massive, overwhelming curiosity about my designs. The world wanted to see the smart terrariums that had humiliated the bully. Verdinest was no longer a tiny, desperate booth in a crowded convention center. In the span of a single weekend, it had become the most coveted new name in sustainable luxury. The avalanche did not start slowly. Exactly 7 days after the convention doors closed, my company inbox was entirely unrecognizable. The viral outrage had seamlessly transmuted into ravenous consumer demand. I sat at my makeshift kitchen command center, watching the notification counter tick upward in real time. 1,000 orders, 3,000 orders. By the end of the week, I was staring at over 5,000 individual pre-orders for the smart terrariums. But the crown jewel arrived on a Tuesday morning, an urgent inquiry from the lead procurement director of a massive, ultra-luxury eco-hotel chain based in California. They did not just want a coffee table. They wanted custom, wall-to-wall intelligent green installations for all 45 of their flagship penthouse suites. It was a contract worth nearly $2 million. I immediately filed the official paperwork to formally incorporate my brand. The detached three-car garage, which had once been my solitary sanctuary, was instantly too small. But it had to serve as our launchpad. I needed a workforce, and I knew exactly who to hire. I bypassed the standard corporate talent pools and actively recruited a fierce, dedicated team. I hired 6 incredibly sharp single mothers who needed flexible schedules but possessed brilliant organizational and technical skills to handle the physical construction. I brought on 4 master carpenters who had recently been laid off by a massive furniture manufacturing plant across town. Together, we stripped that garage down to the studs and rebuilt it into a highly efficient, small-scale automated production facility. The air was constantly filled with the rich scent of cut walnut, the sharp tang of soldering iron flux, and the steady hum of microsaws. We were operating at maximum capacity, running 2 12-hour shifts a day to meet the staggering demand. While my days were fueled by pure momentum and the thrill of creation, Julian's world was rapidly and violently imploding. The internet has an incredibly long, unforgiving memory, and the venture capital world despises a public relations nightmare. The viral video of him acting like an arrogant, abusive tyrant at the expo had reached the screens of the very people he was trying to impress. The angel investors who had initially backed his startup suddenly saw him not as a visionary, but as a massive, unhinged liability. Within a span of 72 hours, 3 of Axiom Stride's primary financial backers pulled their term sheets completely. They yanked their funding, leaving his company financially starving and functionally paralyzed. He was losing control, and the realization made him reckless. My phone began to buzz frantically late one night. It was a barrage of text messages from Julian, his digital voice dripping with a pathetic mixture of rage and panic. "You think you have actually won," he wrote. "This is just dumb luck, a pathetic internet fluke. You are nothing without the foundation I gave you. Take that video down right now, or I swear to God I will destroy you at the divorce hearing. I will make sure you leave with absolutely nothing." I read the messages twice. A month ago, those words would have sent me spiraling into a panic attack. Now, they were just sad. I did not type a single letter in response. I simply blocked his number and went back to sleep. I had a major media appearance the next morning. Leading startup magazines and business networks were practically fighting each other for an exclusive interview, desperate to profile the woman who turned a viral humiliation into a botanical technology empire. I selected the top-rated business strategy podcast in the country. I walked into their sleek, glass-walled recording studio wearing a razor-sharp, tailored emerald green power suit that fit like absolute armor. I did not look like a discarded, weeping victim. I looked like a CEO who owned the room. When the host inevitably brought up the viral confrontation, attempting to bait me into a dramatic, emotional rant about my failing marriage, I smoothly sidestepped the trap. "We do not focus on background noise," I said confidently into the studio microphone, leaning forward with a calm, predatory smile. "We focus on innovation. When someone tries to publicly devalue your life's work, you do not argue with them. You simply let your technology speak for itself, and you use their temporary tantrum as free global marketing to generate your first $1 million in revenue. Adversity is just another word for unoptimized cash flow." The clip of that interview hit the internet 2 hours later. It was the ultimate, devastating blow to his ego. I had not just beaten him, I had rendered him entirely irrelevant. He was no longer the main character in my life. He was just a minor, embarrassing footnote in my origin story. 6 months evaporated in a relentless, exhausting blur of hyper-expansion and staggering profits. While my company soared into the stratosphere, the heavy gravity of reality finally caught up with Julian. Axiom Stride Innovations was bleeding out. Their highly publicized flagship tech product turned out to be nothing more than vaporware, a hollow shell of stolen code and empty promises that could never even pass a basic beta test. When the venture capital completely dried up and the walls began to violently close in, his incredibly loyal, 24-year-old co-founder saw the writing on the wall. She realized the corporate ship was not just sinking, it was already resting on the ocean floor, executing a masterclass in self-preservation. She quietly liquidated the final remaining drops of their working capital, packed her expensive designer bags, and completely vanished. She left Julian completely alone in an empty, overpriced, leased office, surrounded by a mountain of incredibly angry creditors. Desperation has a funny way of making arrogant men incredibly stupid. The bitter winter winds were howling outside the Denver County Courthouse, but inside the mahogany-paneled mediation room, the atmosphere was perfectly, artificially controlled. Julian sat across from me at the heavy oak conference table. He looked entirely haggard. His bespoke suit hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and the dark, bruised circles under his eyes betrayed countless sleepless nights. Yet, despite his obvious decay, his lawyer, a slick man with a highly aggressive courtroom reputation, leaned forward with a sickeningly confident smirk. "My client is willing to be generous today," Julian's attorney announced, sliding a dense, heavily highlighted legal document across the polished wood. "We recognize that your little plant business has gained some unexpected traction in the media. However, since the concept for Verdinest was clearly developed, prototyped, and launched while you were still legally residing under my client's roof and within the exact duration of your legal marriage, it is unequivocally classified as community property. We are formally demanding 50% of all company shares, current liquid assets, and future intellectual property." Julian shot me a look of pure, venomous triumph from across the table. He genuinely thought he had found the ultimate legal loophole. He thought he could pull the ripcord on his failing startup and parachute softly right onto the thriving empire I had built with my bare hands and endless sleepless nights. This was the exact, precise moment I had been waiting for over the last 6 months. I did not flinch. I did not glare. I simply turned my head slightly toward Marcus Thorne, my attorney. Marcus smiled, and it was a terrifying, predatory expression that instantly dropped the temperature in the room. "That is a truly fascinating legal theory, Counselor," Marcus replied smoothly, not even bothering to pick up their demanding document. "However, it is entirely irrelevant to reality. Let me direct your attention to this." Marcus lifted a heavy, leather-bound folder from his briefcase and dropped it onto the center of the table with a loud, authoritative thud. "The initial $4,500 used to secure the exhibition space and purchase the raw materials to launch Verdinest did not come from any joint marital account," Marcus explained, his voice echoing sharply in the silent room. "Every single cent of those funds was drawn from an isolated, generation-skipping trust fund established by my client's late grandfather. Long before this marriage ever occurred, under Colorado state law, assets generated purely from an independent, non-commingled trust remain the sole, exclusive property of the beneficiary. Your client does not own a single leaf of Verdinest, let alone 50% of the corporation." The arrogant smirk instantly melted off the face of Julian's attorney. He scrambled forward, ripping open the folder, his eyes frantically scanning the impenetrable, ironclad trust documents. Julian's jaw tightened dangerously, a cold, nervous sweat breaking out across his forehead. But we were not even close to being finished. I was not there simply to defend my company. I was there to execute the absolute kill shot. Marcus reached back into his leather briefcase and produced 3 massive, densely packed forensic binders. He bypassed Julian's attorney entirely and slid them directly toward the presiding judge, sitting at the head of the long table. "Your Honor," Marcus stated, his tone shifting from polite mockery to absolute, razor-sharp legal gravity, since opposing counsel is so keenly interested in the fair allocation of assets, we must present crucial evidence regarding the severe, malicious depletion of marital assets deliberately caused by Mr. Vance, We have compiled comprehensive digital forensics, network server logs, and exact IP address timestamps. Julian visibly flinched, the color completely drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a hollow ghost. Marcus continued relentlessly, hammering every word like a nail into a coffin. These unalterable records conclusively prove that Julian Vance engaged in highly premeditated financial fraud. He explicitly forged my client's signature to illegally mortgage her inherited family property. Furthermore, the embedded code my client originally installed on the home network captured his specific laptop's hardware address, initiating the forgery. We have the exact bank routing numbers demonstrating that he subsequently funneled that fraudulently obtained capital directly into offshore holding accounts associated with Axiom Stride Innovations, completely bypassing all marital oversight and legal transparency. The silence in the room was absolute and deafening. The judge, a stern woman with decades of zero-tolerance experience, flipped open the first heavy binder. She traced the highlighted server logs, the blatantly manipulated signature lines, and the illegal transfer receipts. Her expression rapidly hardened into a mask of absolute judicial fury. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice dripping with profound disgust, "is your counsel prepared right now to offer any viable defense for these explicitly documented fraudulent wire transfers?" Julian's lawyer slammed his own folder shut and physically scooted his chair several inches away from Julian. "Your Honor, I was absolutely not made aware of any forged financial instruments by my client prior to this mediation." "I thought as much," the judge snapped fiercely. She slammed her hand flat against the table. "The ridiculous petition for 50% of Verdinest is categorically denied with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, based on this overwhelming preliminary evidence, I am immediately freezing all of Mr. Vance's remaining personal and corporate financial accounts. A full, unredacted transcript of today's proceedings, along with these forensic binders, is being forwarded immediately to the federal prosecutor's office. You are looking at a multi-count federal indictment for wire fraud, identity theft, and severe financial deception." Julian sat completely frozen in his chair, utterly paralyzed by the crushing, inescapable weight of his new reality. He had walked into that room fully expecting to steal half of my hard-earned empire. Now, he was leaving with absolutely nothing. Staring straight down the barrel of a massive federal criminal investigation, he slowly, agonizingly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide with a suffocating terror he had never known before. For the first time in his entire miserable life, he finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He realized that the woman he had treated like a helpless, decorative accessory had meticulously, silently, and flawlessly dug a massive grave right beneath his expensive leather shoes, leading him straight into an inescapable legal slaughterhouse. 1.5 years after the day I signed those divorce papers, the world looked entirely different. The magnificent, multi-story glass headquarters of Verdinest now dominated a prime block in downtown Denver. I sat behind a massive, polished stone desk in my penthouse corner office, reviewing our latest international shipping logistics. When my intercom buzzed, my assistant informed me that a man was downstairs begging for 5 minutes of my time. I already knew exactly who it was. I had been expecting him. Julian was no longer the arrogant tech visionary who wore his confidence like a tailored suit. He looked utterly broken. He was currently grinding away as a low-level outbound telemarketer, cold-calling strangers for minimum wage just to pay off the massive court-ordered restitution while he awaited his formal sentencing for federal financial fraud. He was desperately clinging to a plea deal that would only grant him a suspended prison sentence if he could magically produce the funds he owed. He shuffled into my pristine office, his clothes worn and his shoulders heavily slumped. He stood before my desk, looking around at the absolute luxury of the empire I had built. Then, to my absolute astonishment, he dropped directly to his knees on the plush carpet. He began to weep uncontrollably, begging me for a low-level warehouse job or a small personal loan. "Haley, please," he sobbed, his voice trembling with a pathetic desperation. "You have to help me out of this. If you really think about it, thanks to me leaving, you finally had the motivation to become as successful as you are today. You owe me this much for pushing you. I felt absolutely zero anger. The fire of my resentment had burned out a long time ago, leaving behind only cold, hardened power. I smiled gently at him. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a crisp, heavily notarized legal document, and pushed it across the sleek surface toward him. It was a liquidation asset purchase contract. He wiped his red eyes and stared at the paper in sheer confusion. Take a very close look at the purchasing entity, I instructed calmly. It was a transfer deed for every single core technology patent originally filed under Axiom Stride Innovations. When his fraudulent company completely imploded and filed for bankruptcy, all of its intellectual property was quietly auctioned off for absolute pennies on the dollar to an anonymous shell corporation. I used a fraction of the quarterly profits from Verdanest to buy your entire life's work, I explained, my voice soft but incredibly sharp. I am the ultimate legal creditor holding those patents. Julian, I own the very ideas you tried to steal my grandfather's house to fund. He looked up at me, his face draining of whatever color it had left. His eyes widened in absolute horror as the final, devastating reality crashed down upon him. He had walked in hoping to leverage my pity, only to realize I was the one holding the leash to his entire ruined existence. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and looked down at him. You were right. I could not survive without you. I rose up to become the one who acquires you. Without waiting for his response, I pressed the silver button on my intercom and calmly asked building security to escort Mr. Vance off the premises permanently. I did not even bother to watch him being dragged out of my office. Instead, I stood up and walked over to the towering, floor-to-ceiling glass windows. I picked up a crystal glass of deep, expensive red wine and took a slow, deeply satisfying sip. I looked down at the brilliant, glowing lights of the Denver skyline spreading out beneath me. I took a deep breath of the crisp, conditioned air, completely reveling in an extraordinary life of absolute wealth and limitless freedom, knowing with perfect certainty that I would never, ever have to shrink myself to fit into any man's shadow again. Thank you so genuinely for listening to our story today. Where in the world are you tuning in from? We would love to know. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping us out with just $1. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code right on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the comments section below. This small contribution allows our channel to pay the incredible staff who work hard to support their families and continue creating more amazing stories just for you. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.